This is a quick message to my YouTube audience before we begin. I'm going to test going back to more frequent 30-minute episodes instead of less frequent 60-minute episodes. The longer episodes take so much more time to put together, and I've found it extremely difficult to find enough stories for common themes as often anymore. For example, have you noticed how many of my videos are just quotation mark titles, with random stories filling the runtime? Remember when I used to make videos about loads of topics, like scary Walmart stories, summer camp encounters, episodes about the less common cryptids? I really miss that. You won't be getting less content this way, technically, but it will save my sanity and my vocal cords a lot of stress. So I really appreciate your understanding. Again, it's just a test. We'll see how it goes.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
I hope you've downed a few espressos today, boys and girls, because I just saw a strange man in a bunny costume skulking around outside of Dead and Roasted. He's got an axe too, and I don't think it's coffee beans he wants to slice. Hold up, he wrote a message on a piece of paper and he placed it against the window. It's your beans I want. Anyway, before he breaks in and starts selling 5 pounds of darkness for $5, an excellent deal by the way, I've got some new stories to share with you, featuring the extremely disturbing things people witnessed while working at night. These are tales from the break room. The Bunny Beneath Colchester Overpass, from Jason R. I don't know how anyone can truly retire. For myself, retirement only lasted a few weeks. My home got a fresh coat of paint. I scrubbed the outside of it completely clean. I manicured the yard. My God, I was losing my mind. Rather than listen to me whine, my wife told me to find something to do with my time, or she would strangle me. Since retiring, I became a self-employed cryptid hunter. Obviously, it doesn't pay much, and the hours suck, but you get to spend endless hours on the road, only to see nothing. When you're trying to write a book about bizarre creatures, it helps to actually be able to find said creatures. But let's be honest, how many cryptids have actually been found? Whenever my wife and I would go anywhere, we'd bring along video equipment and go on little cryptid hunts. By and large, they were exactly what one would expect. You'd go out, find nothing, or find the terrifying stomping grounds of these elusive creatures to be patches of boring forest, muddy ponds, and little else. The closest we've come to finding some mysterious creature is getting a rotten log tossed at us down in the Everglades. So, in my infinite wisdom, I decided to go after something a bit more substantial. A phantom. The spirit of a madman who has haunted the Virginia countryside for over a century. The Bunny Man. I thought it was a joke. I mean, who in their right mind would fear the Bunny Man? I do, now. Whenever we go out on our little voyages, I do a deep dive on all the lore of whichever entity we're hunting. In terms of the Bunny Man, there's a ton of records and information. Most of it is confusing, and in more than a few cases, it's contradictory. I'm going to try to separate the different origins and backgrounds as best I can. There are different aspects of these variations that pop in and out of new sightings and reports. Long story short, it's a muddled, historical mess. If you look up the Bunny Man on Wikipedia, you'll be told that his story began in 1970. Well, so much for Wikipedia. The first reports of a Bunny Man stretch all the way back to the early 1900s. That's right, his story is over 120 years old. To most people of Fairfax County, Virginia, the Bunny Man is less a cryptid and more an urban legend. As I would later find out, it's much more than just a folktale. The first report of this creature or person is as ridiculous as the name suggests. Either a person or people claim to have seen a giant, vaguely man-shaped bunny rabbit, or a man in a rabbit costume. Things become a lot less funny when you discover that this entity was spotted holding a large knife. The foundation of the Bunny Man legend starts with the most classic of classic horror tropes, an escaped mental patient. You see, once upon a time, an insane asylum existed in Clifton, Virginia. The area's population had boomed after the close of the Civil War. As you can imagine, these people didn't want to raise their kids next to what they perceived was a threat. Residents started a petition asking for the inmates to be moved to Lorton Prison. As so often is the case in these legends, one of the vehicles transporting the inmates wrecked. 10 inmates were able to escape. After an exhaustive search, all but 2 of the men were found and captured. That left Marcus Walster and Douglas Griffin. In a rather depressing indictment of law enforcement of the area, after a while, the search for these men was called off. But then one day, Walster was found. Or at least, his body was. It was discovered, hanging from the Colchester Overpass. As is the case with most myths and legends, there are parts which just don't pass the smell test. In this case, it was what was found near his body that raises some red flags. According to legend, a footprint was found near his corpse. Inside the footprint was a message. "You will never find me, and you know it too." Signed, the Bunny Man. The more I looked into it, the more disturbing things got. In 1905, some teens decided to pay a visit to Colchester Overpass. It was a horrifically bad idea. Since the discovery of Walster's body, it had been nicknamed Bunny Man's Bridge. I say horrifically because according to the legend, the kids' mutilated bodies were found hanging from that bridge, just as Marcus Walster's had, half a decade earlier. The overpass became a local boogeyman. Parents forbade their kids from going anywhere near the place. Who could blame them? Anytime a kid got out of line, their parents would warn them that the Bunny Man was coming for them, so they'd better behave or they'd find their body hanging from the bridge. Now, let me stop right there and say that is one of the most jacked up things I saw while doing my research. Whichever parent said that to their kid needs to receive regular visits from Child Protective Services. Fast forward a few decades. In 1970, a report came out about a lunatic running around in a bunny costume wielding a hatchet. Needless to say, he was not out chopping wood. But in this chapter of the Bunny Man saga, things veered more toward the plausible. On a cold night in October of 1970, U.S. Air Force Academy cadet Robert Bennett and his fiancée were traveling along Guinea Road in the small town of Burke. They parked and got ready to visit Bennett's uncle. Something outside their car moved, catching their eyes. Before they could react, the front passenger window was smashed in. Terrified, they looked out the gaping hole and saw a man standing outside. He began to scream at them about how they were trespassing on private property and that he had their license number. Looking down, they found the hatchet that the madman had lobbed at them lying on the floor of the car. When you look into these accounts, it's critical to just report the facts. And the fact is, the 2 witnesses didn't agree as to what they saw. Bennett said he had seen a man in a bunny suit. His fiancée said the man was dressed in a white robe and tall pointed hat. Make of that what you will. Maybe it's just me, but the strangest thing about this story was what the police did with the hatchet after they completed their investigation. They gave it back to Bennett. 10 days later, on October 29th, the Bunny Man struck again. A security guard named Paul Phillips saw someone standing on the porch of a home undergoing construction. The house was located in Kings Park West on Guinea Road, the same road that Bennett and his fiancée had parked on just a week and a half earlier. Phillips' description is similar to the Air Force cadets in several ways. He claimed to see a man dressed in a bunny suit, although he said the costume was black, gray, and white, not just white. Another commonality between the two reports is the theme that Bunny Man didn't appreciate people wandering into his territory, with shouts of, "You are trespassing," and "If you come any closer, I'll chop off your head." To prove he meant business, Bunny Man began chopping at the porch with an axe. Phillips provided a more detailed description of this loon. The guard said he was about 20 years old, a little over 5.5 feet tall, weighing about 175 pounds. How he could gauge the weight of a man dressed in a bunny suit is both impressive and dubious. Try as I might, I couldn't find anything that suggested Phillips had heard about Bennett's encounter. If he had been aware, it would have explained what happened next. In the weeks after Bennett and Phillips' alleged encounters, the police received more than 50 reports from citizens claiming they too had encountered a madman dressed as a giant bunny rabbit. I'm sure you can imagine that when a sensational story comes out about a monster, UFO, or whatnot, everyone and their brother claims they too had a similar experience. As for me, at the time, I was having a hard time buying into this cryptid. Apparently, the Fairfax County Police had felt the same way. With little to no evidence, they closed both cases without making an arrest. One notable newspaper, at least it was back then, published an article claiming that Bunny Man had eaten somebody's cat. As I drove my way toward the center of the Bunny Man legend, I tried to wrap my head around over a century's worth of reports. One thing I could say with certainty was that the Bunny Man defies classification. Each generation has added its own layer to the myth, or mangled what has come before. When you do what I do, you live a life reading between the lines. You hunt down articles hoping to find a few words that would help you pinpoint a specific location, or maybe an address, something about the description, anything. Allow me to say from experience, more than a few cryptid hunters out there are fueled more by emotion and passion, rather than a dedication to the facts and science. After trolling through some of the sites with information about the Bunny Man, I wanted to cry. Some are plagiarism personified. Others not only contradicted other sources, but themselves as well. As the years passed, the legends devolved. Claims began circulating that on midnight on Halloween, you could see a flash of light at the bridge. Now, the legend of the Bunny Man has escaped its Virginia confines and has spread across the nation. There's a series of Bunny Man movies, and you can even get a Bunny Man t-shirt or get hammered on Bunny Man beer. Is it any wonder that most people don't take reports like these seriously? Anyway, there's one thing that appears in almost all tellings of the Bunny Man story: Colchester Overpass. Packing my Hyundai Elantra with food and sodas, and donning my warmest coat, I headed to Virginia in search of a monster. For this particular excursion, I was going it alone. The wife had put her foot down when I suggested we go hunting for a homicidal maniac dressed in a rabbit costume. I nearly got knocked out by a skunk ape. I don't want my tombstone to read, "Here lies Alice, killed by a moron dressed like Bugs Bunny." With a kiss and a shake of her head, she wished me the best of luck as I started out on my voyage. During my research, I discovered that it's all but illegal to stake the bridge out on Halloween. Local law enforcement has been known to go as far as to block off the bridge during the spooky holiday. Just to be safe, I decided not to visit the disturbing landmark on Halloween. I didn't want to get arrested for trespassing, but I also knew treading on his domain was the one thing I could do that would draw the Bunny Man's attention. I didn't think there was much chance I'd see much of anything. The main reason I went was to do some research and to be able to say that I'd actually been there. After checking in at my hotel, I spent the day traveling around the local area. It's less than 6 miles between Bunnyman Bridge and Kings Park West. It didn't take me long to get a general lay of the land. I stopped at stores and drove up and down the streets. Everywhere I went, things felt off. The people, the buildings, everything seemed to be under the influence of something. I scolded myself. Dude, stop. You just got here. The bridge itself is about as boring as one would imagine, well, during the day. When it got dark, everything changed. The faded whites and muted grays became deeper, darker. I don't know how to describe it, but deeper fits the best. It felt like the whole area sank into itself, falling into the dark. Everything in the surrounding area just started steeping into the growing blackness as the sun dipped below the horizon. In a lot of the stories you hear on this channel, there are always statements that things just got quiet, or the sounds of animals in the wind disappeared. That's sort of what happened on my first night there, but not really. The environment made me feel like sounds of joy never existed at all. The whole area around the bridge felt as if it was detached from the rest of the world. It was almost like I couldn't hear, or that I was underwater, or something else. And then I got cold, bone-achingly cold. I felt like I was suffering from hypothermia, despite being completely warm and dry. I'm not easily unnerved. Most of the places I visit don't so much as elicit a yawn. But it felt like this bridge was swallowing the world around me. There were no flashes of light on the night I was there. If anything, things just seemed to get darker and harder. When I say harder, I mean difficult to move. It's like when you try to run when you're dreaming, and no matter how hard you try, you can't exceed a slow crawl. That's when I heard them, the voices. There were definitely voices in the dark. At first, they seemed to be coming from a great distance away, so distant that I couldn't quite make them out. As they grew nearer, I was able to pick out words amongst all the gibberish. Not here, and you can't find me, were the ones that I heard the clearest. Something was out there, but it didn't appear focused or coherent. I think Colchester Overpass is a wrinkle of unresolved horrors and tragedies that pull pain in towards itself. It might have always been that way, and the Bunnyman stories just gave the dark energy a form. Or maybe the entity is just a touchstone that the locals internalized as a symbol of the dark presence that lurks there. I didn't consider any of this at the time. The closer the voices became, the more my rational mind screamed at me to run. I got back in my car and drove to the hotel as fast as I could. I prayed that whatever lurked out there hadn't followed me. To my horror, it did. On the way back, I encountered several people who seemed out of place, given how late it was. Entering the hotel lobby, I nearly bumped into a worn-looking man in his mid-30s. He seemed to come alive as soon as he caught sight of me. "Did you have fun out there tonight?" That was the final straw. I packed my bags and left that night. On the way back, I had lots of time to think. I started to develop a theory. What if, all those years ago, something happened there? What if the fabric of the region had become unsettled somehow? When I'd been there, it had felt like I was walking through Stephen King's It. It was as if some force had taken over the area, smothering it in its dark embrace. Poetic license aside, there was something about the region that made me glad to head home. On the way back, I found myself wondering, did the Bunnyman murders create a paranormal scar that impacts the area to this very day? Is that why the entity has appeared in so many different incarnations throughout the decades? I don't think the Bunny Man is a cryptid, or even an urban legend. I think it's an influence. Something there causes bad things to happen. It brings out the worst in people, and I'm very happy to declare that I will never be going back there again. In fact, after my experiences at Bunnyman Bridge, I'm not sure I'll be doing any more field research for my book. The Haunted Hotel. From Claranonymous. I used to be a travel writer several years ago, flying to different cities, checking out cool spots, eating at the finest establishments as the staff tried to impress me so that I'd have to write a great article about them. That could be the definition of a dream job for any young person. The salary was meager, but at least I got these cool experiences on somebody else's dime, right? That thought used to tide me over those dead, broke end of the months as I struggled to pay the high rent of my city. Until my trip to a particular Asian city. I won't say which it was. My normie article about it is still out there, and a clever listener could probably deduce which one it was. Hey, want to go to a haunted hotel? It was my editor who pitched the story to me. A 5-star hotel with rumors of a dark past, and a bunch of negative reviews that threatened to besmirch its good name. The hotel had just gone through an expensive renovation, and was eager to shed its old reputation, so it was sending out press kits and trips left, right, and center in its marketing bid to attract clientele. My editor knew I was a major skeptic in a city full of superstition and ghost stories. He thought it would be funny if something did happen to me and I'd have to eat crow, accepting that the supernatural might be real. A haunted hotel was low on my list of thrills, but I thought, what the heck? That's 2 nights of free food and alcohol. I arrived in style. A sleek black limousine had picked me up from the airport, and the hotel's marketing person was at the entrance, ready to take me on a tour of the place. I noticed some strange configurations of the building right away, said to allow for better feng shui, the Chinese art of geomancy. I wish I could describe it more, but trust me, the placements and shapes of certain furniture and fixtures would make you go, wow, they really do like this shape. There were also some amulets and talismans here and there, just tastefully added to the decor, without being too obviously set in place. You wouldn't have noticed them if you were not specifically looking for them. The hotel also had some odd choices for artwork in the lobby. I'm not going to elaborate, this is a big giveaway. All these were noted in hotel reviews to be ways that the management have tried to keep the ghosts at bay. With this renovation at least, these spiritual additions were less garish than before and blended nicely with the modern decor. The hotel staff took me all over the hotel compound before ending off with a sumptuous dinner at one of the restaurants. Then I was finally left alone in my suite. There was a separate living study room with a small toilet and a sliding door that led to the bedroom and ensuite bathroom. The first thing I noticed was a group of tiny little Buddhist monks decorating one of the glass shelves. Each had a different pose, one covering his eyes, the next his ears, another his mouth, and the fourth one was just sitting still and smiling. I've never seen a grouping of 4 before. Understandably so, because 4 is a highly unlucky number in Chinese culture. After my shower, I called my then boyfriend to wish him good night before trying to go to sleep. I was exhausted from the travel and the non-stop socializing, but for some reason, adrenaline was coursing through my veins. I'd shut off all the lights and slid the bedroom door shut. The floor-to-ceiling windows that gave a magnificent view of the city skyline were covered over with some heavy blackout curtains, so light was not a problem. I shut my eyes again, but without wanting to do so, my ears were straining to hear something other than the pounding of my heart. Silence engulfed the room, and faintly, I could hear the slow dripping of the tap. I got up to shut it off, puzzled, because I'm normally a fastidious person when it comes to water conservation. But just as I started to walk back into the bedroom, I stopped. Something was out of place. A sliver of light made its way across the floor. The sliding door had opened just an inch, revealing a little that the living room was flooded with light. But how could that be? I'd switched off all the lights before retreating to the bedroom. I froze by the bathroom door, now nervous to take a step further. Did someone enter my suite? I waited for a few moments before yanking the sliding door to the side, and nothing. No one was there. Just all the lights were switched on. Even the shelving lights were on. All my stuff from the day was where I left it. My laptop was on the coffee table, my handbag and a book on the sofa. There was a container of nuts strewn across the round dining table. That I hadn't touched. They were part of the welcome gifts of snacks and a bottle of red wine from the hotel. I was absolutely sure I had not even taken the container from its place near the entryway. I strode to the toilet by the entrance. Empty, of course. No one was hiding in any place that could fit a human. The security door latch was still on. Not even the staff could breach that if they had another key card to the room. Spooked, I left the lights as they were, then went back to the bedroom, making sure the sliding door was properly shut. I switched on the lights and tried to sleep as best I could. Throughout the night, I heard things moving about in the living room, deliberate movements, though they were done quietly. Sometimes soft footsteps on the parquet, though none of them came right up to the bedroom door. I couldn't parse what was going on. I was going mad, trying to rationalize those sounds. And when everything finally stopped, I realized it was dawn, and I hadn't slept at all. That day was a long one, starting early with another tour, this time of the city. The meals, the socializing, the need to have my game face on, all went by in a blur until night fell and I had some time to myself. I picked up local snacks for supper, which I took back to my room. There was to be a massive brunch the next day before my flight, so I'd wanted to pack my stuff and get my things in order instead of doing it at the last minute. I was saddled with a great deal of souvenirs, gifts from the hotel, and press literature from the hotel, along with the random things I managed to accumulate during the short trip. I was nervous about going through another sleepless night, so I spoke out loud. "Leave me alone. Let me sleep. I'm leaving tomorrow." I felt stupid doing that, but I thought it wouldn't hurt. Showing fear can make you a target with predators, so maybe if I was assertive with whatever the heck was in that room with me, it could work. Of course, nothing replied. I continued with the rest of my winding down routine. Then I retired to bed. This time, I left all the lights on. I had my eyes shut, drifting away in that half-dreaming, half-awake state, when I was suddenly jolted back to reality. Something was standing right at my bedside. I felt it. I didn't see it. And before I could even fully register what was going on, I felt its face coming near to my ear, and it blew a quick, cold breath. Anger flooded me. I had had enough. My eyes flew open and I shot up from the bed. Nothing, of course, was there. But I was enraged now. I tore the room apart, trying to look for a clue, then stomped off to do the same to the living room. The only thing out of place were the snacks. My half-eaten supper was now strewn across the table and the floor underneath it. Crisps were smashed and scattered about. The sauces for the fried chicken were smeared on the floor. I was aghast. Nothing made sense. I cleaned things up as best I could and turned the TV and laptop on. I guess I would just sleep on the flight home. At the brunch the next day, I carefully tried to broach the subject of ghosts with the hotel's PR person. A slight unease crept across her face before a professional smile took over, and she chirped out the carefully rehearsed, "Those are just rumors. By the way, they didn't get it right. This compound was not used as a blank during the war." Another wide smile, and she smoothly changed the subject. The next few days back home were uneventful, until a pressing deadline had me deciding to spend the night at my office. It wasn't an unusual thing. I frequently did that since it was so much easier to write in the silence with no one around. Once everyone left, I locked up the main door, making sure the security system was set properly, then settled at my desk. I was fully focused on my work for a few hours until a strange rustling broke me out of my concentration. I looked around. The room was suddenly extremely cold. The air conditioning unit must have been acting up again, knocking some papers onto the floor, I thought. I got back to my work and tried to pick up where I'd left off, until a very loud tapping of the keyboard keys behind me. I stood up so fast, I knocked my swivel chair against the wall, and the force rebounded the chair straight at me, causing me to fall. That was it. Something in my gut told me to get out. I hurriedly packed up my things and called for an Uber. I don't know if the incident was connected to my hotel stay, but since nothing of that sort had ever happened to me in the countless nights I spent at the office, I'm inclined to think that they are connected. I left that job, I left that industry, maybe just a year later. As far as I can tell, judging from the latest reviews, the hotel is still trying to reform its image by press trips and influencer trips. Some claim nothing happened to them in their stay, others describe creepy occurrences in the elevators, and sometimes, like me, in the rooms. There are several theories online as to the source of these hauntings, but they contradict each other, and typing them out will make the hotel too identifiable. I've looked up the history of the hotel, and the PR person was at least right about the wartime use of the location. So what could be causing these disturbances? I don't know. Years after, I'm now far more receptive to the idea of the supernatural, but really it's just left me with more questions than answers. How could something incorporeal have that much energy to do messes like that, and make that much noise? Back in my day. From Chris. I was a security officer for a rather nice office building in the 1980s. I was mostly in charge of the night shift, and one night I was alone in the building and everyone had left for the evening. Most nights I would read books in the office, watching the CCTV for a few hours before getting up and doing rounds. I tried to do rounds every 2 to 3 hours, and always had to jot down if anything happened once I got back to the office. That evening was pretty average. I was 2 hours into my shift and had a bowl of chili in my hands, nibbling away while focused on the monitors. At the moment, I didn't notice anything abnormal, so I turned away, placing the chili down and checking my pager. I had no messages. No 911s from family or coworkers, so I flipped through one of the magazines I found in the office. It was a rather nice one with new motorcycles and hot rods, really just something to daydream about. I set down the book as my alarm chirped, and I drew my attention to my screens. I noticed small flickers in the lower right screen, and I got up, slightly alarmed, not knowing if it was a flashlight or just glitches in the system. This was a newer system, so pretty unlikely, but I wrote down the time and which monitor, and I got up to investigate anyway, thinking maybe it was an office worker who had forgotten something, which would have been odd because I was sure I'd locked everything down already. I walked out of the office, my pager on my hip, and my hand firmly wrapped around the rather heavy flashlight they gave us. It was heavy enough to swing, if needed, and provided wonderful light. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, checking each and every corner of the floor. Naturally, I found nothing, so I figured it was a glitch, but I couldn't explain the light flickering in the bottom right of the screen. I continued to the 4th floor, where I swore I heard water running, so I made my way there, announcing myself to whoever might be there. I stood in the well-lit restroom. There was no one there, but the water was running and the lights flickered. I figured the water had been left running by someone and that the electricity was having issues, since it was pretty stormy outside. So I shut off the water, turning the lights back off. I began to head back to my office when I heard a slam. I shoved the door to my office open. I saw smoke coming from the same monitor I'd seen that glitch come from. I yanked the cords out from the monitors, calling my boss on his landline. He wasn't answering, so I left a message and wrote a report. The thing is, those were brand new monitors. I had no idea what fried the one that had flickered. I plugged the other ones back in and immediately shut them back down. I'd seen in the snowy CCTV a figure of a shadow. If it was one glitchy screen, that would have been fine, and I would have gone to investigate. But it was the same shadow on each and every screen. I locked the building down, again, for the evening, and I went home. I didn't return for any of my other shifts, but I would learn later that the building had an electrical fire and burned nearly to the ground. Were the things I saw that night an omen, a warning?
Tales from the Break Room is a viewer-submitted podcast featuring allegedly true scary stories that happened on the way to, on the way from, or at work. If you want your story to be narrated on the show, send it to us at eriecast.com/submit. As of April 14th, we're paying 3 cents per word for stories that are approved and make it onto the show. Submission does not guarantee approval or payment. For a limited time only, PayPal only. Tales from the Break Room is an EerieCast Network original podcast hosted by Darkness Prevails. You can follow him on Twitter at Dark Prevails, and you can hear thousands more stories read by him on our other show, Unexplained Encounters. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also enjoy plenty more horror-themed podcasts at eriecast.com.